Okay, and just as I mentioned before class, this is an exciting time in Atlanta. All of the theaters are in their winter, spring seasons have opened, and the Atlanta Film Festival is about to start up in a couple of weeks, I guess. So if you can, try to get out and see some of our local performers. I'm just going to have some short stuff that I want to share with you today, but I want to highlight that the theme really from the beginning has been that there has been this very powerful force that has been operating underground purposefully, deliberately, slowly, methodically, consistently to undermine American democracy. And they have put together a formidable infrastructure to do that. And I wanted you to see that because it's, what we get is the idea if we can just elect this person or that person, if we can just win this fight or that fight, everything will be all right. You have to know the enemy that you're up against. The people who we see on TV who are running for office, etc., they're the actors, they're the performers. They are not the producer of the show. And hopefully that idea may resonate with you. If you watch any of the C-SPAN productions of Congress or the Senate conducting hearings, you'll see a whole bunch of showboating, which is really a performance for the producer. And so, this phenomenon that we had happen in 2008 as something that has been building up since the Mont Pelerin Society at the close of World War II, the idea of free markets. And what became for many people recognized as the father of free markets, Adam Smith, mind you, they didn't like what Adam Smith actually said about free markets, because he talks about the role of government, what government needs to do. So what they did is they altered it. They came up with a revised version of Adam Smith to extract all that stuff about government guardrails and that sort of thing, so it would serve their purposes. And when we get to 2008, the free market is ruling. As I told you, we had a totally disguised market known as the derivative markets, credit default swaps, all of that kind of stuff that was unregulated. It was let the market regulate itself. When we first started talking about it, when we talked about Brooks Lee Bourne, when she raised the flag, it was when it was a $27 trillion market. By 2007, it was a $595 trillion market.
With Bourne out of the way, the last 2 years of the Clinton administration were a heyday of deregulation. OTC derivatives were off limits. Banks were freed to make riskier investments. Wall Street was largely left to regulate itself.
Again and again during the Clinton administration, you see these examples of the top regulators basically saying the market knows better than us, and we're going to let the market do it.
By 2007, the OTC derivatives market had grown to $595 trillion. That's 595 trillion.
Stocks shot higher, giving the Dow its best day in almost
The hands-off approach seemed to be working. Wall Street had bet heavily on the real estate boom.
The economy expanded at a robust 4.3% annual
Those
rate.
derivatives were at the heart of that strategy.
You have derivatives, insuring derivatives, which are based on derivatives. It's almost an Alice in Wonderland kind of profitability.
What, in fact, you essentially had was a big creaking time bomb that needed some sort of event to disrupt all of the assumptions everyone had.
The stock market dropped by hundreds of points right from the open.
The banking industry are plunging.
The rate in America has now soared.
The Dow
The
tumbled
time bomb exploded almost exactly 10 years after the collapse of LTCM.
Investors were shaken by Lehman's bankruptcy filing and what was essentially a
You had the most raw panic the economy and the financial markets had seen since the 1930s. It was ugly, it was broad-based, it was bringing huge institutions to their knees, and a lot of that was tied into derivatives.
They are hidden like landmines in a battlefield, and nobody wants to give money to anybody else because they don't know.
AIG plunging. At one point, they were down 70%.
AIG can't raise $20 billion. They'll have to announce bankruptcy tonight.
It was my worst nightmare coming true. Nobody really knew what was going on in the market. The toxic assets of many of our biggest banks are over-the-counter derivatives and caused the economic downturn that made us lose our savings, lose our jobs, lose our homes. And it was very frightening.
I think to understand the crisis, you have to understand that it had many, many factors that contributed to it. But it's absolutely clear to me that if we had restricted the derivatives, some of the major problems would have been avoided.
Had Brooks Lee Bourne been enfranchised, had Brooks Lee Bourne been listened to, had Brooks Lee Bourne been made part of the process, would that have had a different ending for what subsequently happened in the derivatives market? Certainly.
In the aftermath, one former member of the working group has had a change of heart about Brooks Lee Bourne.
I've come to know her as one of the most capable, dedicated, intelligent, and committed public servants that I have ever come to know. I wish I knew her better in Washington. I could have done much better. I could have made a difference.
And the others? Robert Rubin left government to join top management at Citibank. The taxpayers have pledged more than $100 billion to keep Citi afloat. Rubin's former deputies Larry Summers and Timothy Geithner have become President Barack Obama's chief financial advisors. Neither Rubin nor his former deputy Larry Summers would speak with Frontline about what happened to Brooks Lee Bourne. And Rubin's other top deputy, Gary Gensler, now holds Brooks Lee Bourne's former post at the CFTC. It still lacks authority to regulate OTC derivatives. Alan Greenspan retired from the Federal Reserve just before the crisis hit in 2006.
Committee will please come to order.
Last year, he once again appeared before the Congress.
You see Greenspan at the hearing table after the collapse, and you see a crushed man, really.
He said that the premise that you could trust markets to regulate themselves was misplaced.
You have been a staunch advocate for letting markets regulate themselves. And my question for you is simple. Were you wrong?
Yes. I found a flaw, but I've been very distressed by that fact.
You found a flaw in the reality? A flaw in the model that I perceived is the critical functioning structure that defines how the world works, so to speak.
In other words, you found that your view of the world, your ideology was not right.
Precisely. No, that's precisely the reason I was shocked, because I've been going for 40 years or more with very considerable evidence that it was working exceptionally well.
Now, it's important to understand that the price that was paid for that education of Alan Greenspan cost people their jobs. It cost them their 401ks. it cost them their homes, it cost them their families, it cost them their lives, and they've never recovered from it. The crisis was the worst economic disaster since the Great Depression. The Great Recession led to the loss of more than $2 trillion in global economic growth. It was a shock to the economic system that it unleashed dynamics that we still don't fully understand. According to Al Jazeera, these Americans, those who got hurt by it, wanted a wrecking ball to move to Washington and start tearing things up. The substance of what Trump did not matter as much as the cries of pain and anguish from America's political class. Adam Tooze, in 2008, in the 2008 bonus season, after suffering tens of billions in losses, Wall Street paid out $18.4 billion to its top staff. That was 2.5 times the amount that Congress approved for the president's priority of modernizing America's broadband infrastructure. AIG, it closed its fourth quarter of 2008 with a loss of $61.7 billion, the largest in US corporate history. Nevertheless, on March 16, 2009, the company announced that its financial products division, which had been at the heart of the toxic spill, would be awarding $165 million in bonuses, a figure that might rise to as much as $450 million. So we have people who are terribly hurt and they are angry. And for many of us, we saw that come to pass on January 6th. What I'm showing you is a clip from after the Charlottesville white supremacy action.
Who were these white supremacists who had descended on Charlottesville? And why did the authorities seem so unprepared? I arrive in New York to meet with a retired FBI agent, a man who infiltrated neo-Nazi groups during the 1990s.
This is from Charlottesville.
Mike German tracked the violence in Charlottesville as it unfolded.
This is when the police should be there, and they aren't. And not even in view. I mean, you can't even see somebody close by. I mean, it's one thing to, okay, watch these guys trade some punches and then follow them as they separate and grab them.
Right.
They weren't even doing that. Or let them go home, but then pick them up because you can identify them pretty easily. And what's interesting about Charlottesville is that it was after almost 2 years of increasing violence at these protests. There was Anaheim, Sacramento, the first Berkeley protest in 2017, the Huntington Beach protest, the second Berkeley protest was even more violent, the 5th, 6th, 7th in a series. I could see from my office here in New York City how this was building. This was not just predictable, but predicted. I couldn't believe that there wasn't better intelligence being provided by the federal government, by the FBI, Department of Homeland Security. Particularly when people are coming in from out of state, they should be warning them. These are people who engaged in violence in Berkeley. These are people who engaged in violence in Huntington Beach. Where was the FBI? And unless the FBI, too, has just abandoned this ground, which I would find even more shocking.
And your sort of sense is like, if you allow folks to go out and act very violently over and over and over again in these political spaces, then they basically start to think, hey, the cops are okay with us.
Right, they're going to protect me coming in, let me do it, and then protect me going out. Now that these groups feel that they have some state sanction for that, they are going to be a lot more dangerous in the coming years.
And I think from my security world interest, it's not a big leap to predict that there will be more of this. There will be more bombs at synagogues, more killings in churches, more students killed in their classrooms, more people at the grocery store getting gunned down. Over the past 3 years, maybe 4 years, the Justice Department released a report saying that all of the mass killings were motivated by white supremacy. Now, that's not to mean that there aren't people who are nuts on the other end of the spectrum. What you have are very intense feelings that have been agitated, and they've been agitated by the people who don't want government. They don't want rules. They don't want regulation. They can hire all the police they want to be able to protect them. The hell with everybody else. They really have this sense that they should be in charge, and they should enjoy all of the fruits of the country, so that, you know, they want to get, we want to get rid of unions. We want to get rid of Medicare. We want to get rid of Social Security. Now, how did that happen? If you go back to the end of World War II, Americans loved their country and loved their government. How did this happen? And what I'm suggesting to you is that they copied the same techniques that Nathaniel Bacon used in 1667 to drive wedges. It was, they use issues that are to separate Americans from Americans. They're faux issues. They're not even real issues. Understand that. It's very important. And they are, whenever they find anything that they feel the public is reacting to, they have an apparatus in place to now deploy public relations activities so that they can get into the minds of people and make it into whatever they've decided to make it. It is like the campaign against wokeism. Understand, that ain't by accident. It has been crafted based on a lot of very sophisticated analysis to get people, again, to separate from each other. And that separation can very well result in what would be a modern day civil war. There are many who are arguing that today we are in the midst of a modern day civil war. That's the church bombings, the school shootings, and all that. That's how it will play out. And that there will be a political entity that is marching towards a goal of eliminating democracy and establishing an autocracy. And so how do they, and what becomes the end of that? Well, we have Donald Trump, and we think that if we got rid of Donald Trump, everything will be, well, we're rid of Donald Trump now, and everything ain't over. So it's important to understand that it's the people that you see in the spotlight are not the problem. It's the people in the background who are pulling the strings. And what I think is very important, what I try to highlight in the beginning of the class, is that the people underground, what they are doing is they are using tools that were developed by Freud's nephew, Eddie Bernays. And to talk a little more about that, we have Terry, my sidekick. Gracie Allen, please unmute and share your stuff.
Sure. Am I unmuted?
Yes.
Oh, good. First, I want to thank everybody for their concern about me during the semester. I'm sorry I wasn't able to be here. My message to everybody is take good care of yourselves. I guess I didn't take such good care of myself. My electrolytes got all crazy and I was hospitalized twice, etc. But thank you for your concern. It means a lot to me, and I thank you very much. By the way, listening to what we just saw, what I find particularly galling, and a lot of people don't know this, we have Lehman Brothers, they're gone. Goldman Sachs, this revered institution, do you realize they were selling to their clients what they themselves were shorting? Unbelievable, just adds to our anger. But anyway, you have heard from, I know he doesn't like me to call him a scholar, but he is. He's one of the most scholarly people, if not the most scholarly person I've ever met in my life. And this is after a lifetime in academia. So you've heard from him history, you've heard from him philosophy, you've heard from him reasons about what goes on and what people have done with the psyche of all of us. So what piece can I add quickly? I would have loved during the semester to talk to you about how the social scientists, and that's people that follow Bernays, they really do. That's the underpinning of it all, Freud, Bernays, how the social scientists have watched us individually, have watched us in groups, and figured out a lot about us, more than we know about ourselves. Focus groups, what influence a group has on an individual. You've all heard that the horrible experiment with the guards where they had to stop the experiment because people who were playing the guards became so sadistic and so cruel. Or you've heard the experiment where people were asked to shock the subject if the subject got the question wrong. And that's not helpful, so I'm going to shut the light off. And they did it. And they did it to the extent where after the experiment was over, they couldn't bear what they had done. So there was no amount of debriefing somebody that you were just following what we asked you to do. It didn't matter. They were so guilt-ridden about what they wanted to do. Or the big one, which is your shown lines. And some lines are this big, and there's one line that's ever so small. So the person is asked, the subject is asked, which is the smallest line, or are they all equal? And the subject immediately said, why, of course, the short line, that's the short line. But yet, when the group, and the group was all conspiring with the experimenter, said, no, the lines are equal, so many of them changed their minds from, no, this is the short line to the lines are equal. So the social psychologists, as I said, they know us better than we know ourselves. So what piece can I add? I want to add the practical piece, the piece that hasn't been given to you yet. And here it is, folks. So how can we get in on this? How can we sort of persuade people to come our way? Or how can we manipulate others in a very benign way so that they do what we want them to do? So here's my practical piece of what has been such a scholarly presentation up until now. What are some techniques that we can employ? They're not bad techniques. They're techniques, again, grounded by Freud, grounded by Bernays, supported by the social psychologists, used by the politicians, used by the elite to guide us to think and do as they wish us to think and do. So what can we do when we want others to kind of believe what we believe or follow what we do? Here are some guidelines, some practical, non-scholarly guidelines, how to manipulate. Well, try to the best of your ability, mirror your opponent or the person whom you're speaking to, their gestures. Become kind of one with them. If they have a relaxed posture, you have a relaxed posture. Don't be so afraid of the crossed arms. You know, we've always heard crossed arms means you're not open to anything. Someone's crossing their arms, you can cross your arms too, because the whole idea is to mirror them. There's a whole school of thought, neuralistic programming, where we even imitate their volume, imitate their tone. So if they're speaking loudly, we speak loudly. If they're speaking softly, we speak softly. We mirror them. We become one. We join with them. Because is not a dirty word. If you want someone to kind of take your side, don't be afraid of using because the word because stimulates, oh, there's a reason for doing this. And maybe the reason is something that I could benefit from. So because should be one of your popular words when you're trying to persuade somebody to think or do as you want them to do. Pausing. Pausing has a very big effect on people. Now, remember, this has all been studied by social psychologists and used to politicians' advantages and everybody's advantage. So come on, why can't we use it to our own advantage? So pause. Pause before you make your statement. Make your statement. Then pause again. Pausing is very... it induces, this is important. She's or he's really thought about this. Pausing. Don't be afraid of pausing. It gives your words a much bigger effect. Stay silent. Listen more than we do. Don't jump in so fast. Listen. People tell you who they are if you listen to them. That's good advice no matter what. And very often we don't listen. So we're always so surprised when we find out that people are not what we thought they were. You know, there's a very good, I want to get the quote right, because I think it's so important. Listen to this. We are more likely to act on a feeling without much thought than a thought without much feeling. I'm going to say that again because it's so important. We are more likely to act on a feeling without much thought than a thought without much feeling. Feelings. Okay, let's say there's a group of people and they all want to, it's a board meeting or whatever it is. And they line up because they want to get their point across to the board and to the audience. Be either the first, which sometimes is hard to be because everybody's rushing to get to that line. Be the last. People hear the first and the last sticks in their heads much more than what's in between. So be the first or the last. So remember, this is tips how we can manipulate others. Not that they were becoming, antisocial narcissists. We're not. We're just trying to get people to think as we do. Let's see. Let's say somebody is really against what you're proposing. If you can, try to sit next to them in the audience. Because again, the social psychologists have told us that when you sit close to somebody, that makes the person whom you're sitting close to less inclined to be sharply, severely critical of what you're saying. So if you know someone is absolutely opposed to what you're saying, try and sit next to them. If you can't sit next to them, sit awfully close to them, but it's preferred to sit next to them. By the way, and this can be, you have to be so careful with this because, you don't want to be seen as being deliberately manipulative. No, we want to be manipulative and sneaky about it. Ben Franklin knew that he had a critic, and I read that he asked that critic to borrow a book and then complimented and thanked that person who was always so critical of him about giving him, loaning him the book and what the book meant to him. And the person tended to be less critical. So we can do something like that. I love being devious. Oh, this is a big one, but you will probably know it anyway. Ask for something big and then can always go smaller. Don't go big, because big is harder, don't go small, because small is harder than to go big. Go big and then settle for what you wanted in the first place. I guess a lot of people do that when they're buying cars, or at least when they used to buy cars. Now, you ever see journalists nodding all the time? It's the person's talking. They almost look like a bobblehead, don't they? Person's talking and the journalist is nodding. I always wonder, do they learn that in Journalism 101 to nod along with the individual, or is it something that naturally happens? I suspect they may learn it, because nodding tends to have your person whom you're speaking with or to believe that you are in agreement with him more or less. It makes somebody agree with you more if you nod as they speak. This is very interesting. Draw a triangle with your eyes. And the triangle starts with, you look at the person's eyes, then you look at the forehead of the person and the eyes, and sort of make a triangle with your eyes. That tends to stop the conversation. Isn't that interesting? So even social psychologists have watched eyeball movements. So who knows how they prep these politicians to go and debate one another. I mean, they must be filled with the knowledge gleaned from the knowledge of people that have studied people, whether it's focus groups, whether it's benign questionnaires. Sal has, I'm sure, told you this. They get into our hatreds, they get into our fears, they get into our biases more than we are consciously aware of it ourselves. And a couple of other last tips, because again, my piece is, how can we be benign manipulators, kindly persuasive people? Well, pay attention to your body language. Smiling naturally makes you seem approachable and friendly. I don't know if that's natural. Try smiling in the mirror and see how natural you can smile. No, that's not it either. But anyway, we can do that. Look what I'm doing now. Raising eyebrows signals you're not a threat. Who ever thought? I'll have to do that more. Sal, when you're talking, go like this. But no one finds you threatening anyway. Now, here comes the crossing hands. Don't cross your hands and put your hands in a pocket, because it signals that you're not feeling that comfortable, and it makes you appear less approachable. Can you believe these are things that the social scientists have come up with? A visible neck shows that you're unthreatening and easy to approach. Do I look more unthreatening this way, or do I look? I think Sal looks threatening either way, this way or that, but can you imagine a visible neck? Wow. Eye contact shows interest in the conversation and worthiness. Now, you don't want to stare anybody down, because that's culturally inappropriate for us, but you don't want to continually look away. And you can see some people are interviewed, they almost never look at the interviewer. That's bad. You don't want to stare anybody down. That's bad either. And we're taught as therapists that you have to be very culturally aware of what a culture may dictate that you do. There are some cultures that say if you're speaking with someone who is older than you or has more authority or has a great deal of respect, that you don't want to look straight at them. So what we used to view as suspicious behavior in certain people from other cultures, we've learned that it was culturally induced. Now, this is weird, but evidently the social psychologists tell us that this is relatable. Show your palms, which indicate you're telling the full story. So I think I told the full story, so I'm going to show my palms. And Sal was kind enough to grant me a few minutes with you today, so I'm going to give it back to Sal. But I hope that I have given you some practical tips as to how to be benignly, kindly, persuasive, or I hate to use the word manipulative. It has such a pejorative ring to it. How we can, in a kind way, get people to come around to our thinking. Hope you enjoyed the quick presentation. Back to Sal.
Thanks, Terry. Well, I think that really sums up where we are. I had a final quote from Tony Judd. He's passed. He was a professor at NYU, and he says, "We have entered an age of fear. Insecurity is once again an active ingredient of the political life in Western democracies. Insecurity born of terrorism, of course, but also, and more insidiously, fear of the uncontrollable speed of change, fear of the loss of employment, fear of losing ground to others in an increasingly unequal distribution of resources, fear of losing control of circumstances and routines in our daily life, and perhaps above all, fear that it is not just we who can no longer shape our lives, but that those in authority have also lost control to forces beyond their reach." He says, all the same, you must be able to name a problem if you wish to solve it. Okay, Lauren, George.
Okay, anyone that's got some thoughts on this or questions for either Sal or Terry, please use the raise the hand function, or you can drop a note into the chat box. As usual, I feel like there's so much to digest here. It takes a minute for everybody to kind of think it through. I know for myself, I don't actually come up with my scintillating questions until a day later. So, let's see.
Okay, Ralph, I think you're going to unmute. Go ahead and unmute.
Where is Ralph? Here we
Didn't
go.
raise his hand.
There we go.
Okay. Thank you. I was about to. Seems like I always have something to say, whether I should or not, but I actually took a couple of notes, Sal, because I figured you might call on me to give some thoughts here at the end. But and as I was finishing that, the first thing that jumped out at me was, my own brother, who's very conservative, sort of a libertarian way. We don't agree on politics, on how to get there, but I think he'd be very interested in what you have presented, because he is coming from the standpoint of our leaders are not leading us, our institutions are not being square with us. He sends me books every now and then to read, and I find that he's not out of his mind. We've argued about vaccinations. We've argued about big pharma and Dr. Fauci and stuff. People will have to decide for themselves. I suggest if you read about Dr. Fauci. Perhaps he's not the choir boy he's been made out to be. There's a lot of problems with big pharma. This is not just people on the right saying that. Frontline, PBS, many others have run stories about this. They're way too cozy with our supposed regulators. But my point is, my brother would come at this from completely different politics, and he would think you're right on to it. He's, you know, that's a personal thing. But I also wanted to mention that in most of the course that you've taught, you often from the beginning use the phrase, the slave masters. And it made me think about my father. Years past, we would talk about politics and where people were coming from. And he would use the phrase, well, it's the same people, Ralph. And and he was using it in a racial sense. I mean, there was a big switch. Everybody went to the Republican Party. Doesn't mean all Republicans are racist, but it means that a lot of people in the South, I'm sorry, in my own family, all became Republicans, you know, and it was all after the Southern strategy in 1968. And he, you know, it's the same people. And I remembered reading Kevin Phillips' book, which I'm sure you've read, called Wealth and Democracy. And that was written during the Bush years. And it was mostly, he was aiming at inequality. But I recommend that book to people still now, because he goes through the history of wealthy people and this country. And that relationship is complicated, to say the least. And when they've been in favor of big government things, they were the first in line to take handouts and do things and you know, get their names on buildings and stuff. And when it wasn't, it was all behind the scenes and they opposed it. Things didn't happen, weren't passed, nothing done. I know it's not the same people exactly, but it led me to the other point about fear, because that fear is building on all the past successes, right? Of the people who want to divide, the slave masters, the people who would just kind of like to stay in charge. And the elite is bigger now, and it has more money now, and it has more power now. So to me, the fear is people can point at new things, yes, but it's an old tactic. There's always been somebody you could point at. The foreigners, you know, the spies. And now everything is blamed on China. Maybe it is China, but we're sure as heck going to blame them. So those are kind of the big themes to me. They really do all come together.
Yeah, no, just a couple of things that I would say to that. One is that if I take your brother's you know, position and look at what's the foundation for his position, they will be well-founded. They will be you know, not crazy stuff. It's founded upon something. What I would suggest is that what he's getting is a product of the manipulative techniques that we talked about as to how to frame what you're going to communicate to this person, so that it's not, you know, it seems like, well, that came from a noted graduate of Stanford or from Yale, so there must be some credibility. It came from this institute or that institute. So it's a part of that manipulation. Now, let me say that there you can have where there are two sides to an argument, two viewpoints to something, right? And they can be legitimate, you know, debates. The difference that I would take is that when you are facing a debater who it's not about what they think about the issue. They have an agenda to follow that's been crafted by a very sophisticated, you know, machine. That's not a change of opinions. That is,
right.
You know, this is a manipulative exercise.
He's walking right into it. He's putting that coat on because it fits and he likes it, but he didn't dream this up. This isn't who my brother was.
No, I understand. And mind you, again, what I said is, at the end of World War II, we were a lot of like-minded people. We all believed in democracy, right? And that kind of thing. Didn't mean there weren't differences, but we had a common kind of core belief. Right now, we don't have a core belief. How did that happen? How did that separate? So that's a big distinction that I make. And I've had people send me materials like the stuff that I think your brother might get to say, well, what about this? And, you know, I'd invest the time to take it apart and show what they're doing. But, you know, that gets exhausting to unravel this thing that's been constructed.
Right.
Mind you, if you ever see those emails, you have a friend who sends you an email, or your brother sends you an email, and it's one of those that you can see has been cut and pasted and copied, because you can tell by all the lines that are there, right? This was crafted by that apparatus.
Right.
But you wouldn't know that. You wouldn't know it. It's coming from this one person who has, but it's not.
No, it's not. It's been created for him. And in the case of and I would say this is true of a lot of people on the call, probably. You get these things, and the story is, of course, the story within families, right? Because in my case, we all started out together in the same little group of 3, and yet we're at 3 different places, although honestly, my brother is the outlier. But my point would be, those things come into them, and I've done that. I've gone on Facebook and just taken apart with authoritative sources the nonsense that he's been forwarded and wants to believe. And after doing that 3 or 4 times, I realized, what are you doing? What are you doing? You know, my time counts as valuable too. This is a waste. This is a complete waste. That framework he's in is not going to allow him to just bust out of it and see how he's being pushed around, I think. And, you know, that's the only way I can still reach him is to, and again, I think other people here can testify to this, within families. You know,
I say a couple.
Maybe you can reach them sometimes by saying, well, if you won't read what the other side says, you know, you can't go anywhere. Okay, I'll read what you give me, you know, maybe I'll learn something new. But it's even using everything that was mentioned before, which I'm going to try to do, it's very hard to try to get someone to move up, move out, and just think, you know, maybe that's not right. Maybe they're not a threat to you. Maybe everyone actually could benefit. Maybe you're not being threatened.
Should I say 2 things?
Hard to do. I was mentioning the things that you had mentioned, Terry. Yes.
Yeah, I just want to mention a couple of other things. That
please.
Even the color of the tie that they use in debates has been figured out, really has been figured out by the social psychologists, what certain colors mean. I spoke with someone who is who works at Facebook, high up in Facebook, and is disgusted with Facebook. What Facebook does, we have no idea how they follow us. They follow us with clicks. They follow us where we're not clicking, but where we're just looking. They use algorithms to send us more information that is similar to what we seem to be most interested in. And that's why when people use social media for information, and so many people do, they only get the side that Facebook's algorithm has given them to get. So it's treachery, 360 degrees worth of treachery. And there's an old saying, if you don't know who the sucker is at the poker table, you're the sucker.
Yeah, and we'll go on to the next question, but just the point, though, out of all of this is that force didn't just come about yesterday. This has been, you know, picked up from the slave masters and the Civil War, but made much more sophisticated by the end of World War II. I think we have Maxie. You have to unmute.
Any Yes.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Ben.
Very interesting class, and I'm wondering, Fox News has become news itself more so this week, and I'm wondering if their influence is so great because they say what people want to hear, or do they have a specific game plan in mind? Seem to be undermining democracy seems to be their goal, and I wonder what you feel about Fox.
Well, Fox is one of the outlets that, is communicating this manipulative narrative that's exploiting the fears of people, but they do it in a way that is, at least they had for a while, that where they disguised it enough that they wouldn't be called racist, even though what they were saying was racist and things like it. So I think what you see happening is they're being exposed as being really a propaganda machine, not a news organization. But since they've gotten their narrative into a sizable part of the American population, that narrative isn't going to change just because they've been exposed. It's going to continue. And people, look, see, here's the thing. There are many people who would say, look, race doesn't bother me. I wouldn't call anyone the N-word, or I wouldn't, tell someone to sit in the back of the bus. I'm open to people and all of that. And they may be very genuine when they're telling you that. When there is a news story that people are trying to get into the minds of your kids and manipulate them and make them feel bad about slavery, right? That same person is going to want to protect their kid from, getting that message about Black people. They want to be defensive. So it stirs up what is in the recesses of their mind, the issues about race. Even though they think they're not racist, it is there. It's like Ron DeSantis is using wokeism a lot. He didn't just come up with that. That came from serious research by very sophisticated people. Critical race theory. They didn't just come up with that. Once they saw people were reacting to it, they did loads of studies to say what it's really cueing is a whole narrative in their head, just saying those words. So, it's important for us to recognize that the force we have to fight, the force that is out there to want to dismantle America is not just Donald Trump. It's a bunch of very powerful people who've been working on it for over 70 years. And look, Terry said before, the difference between thoughts and feelings. Here's Joe Biden out there. He's going to tell everybody about how many jobs he's created and about the infrastructure he's going to improve. All of that is about thought. There's nothing about feeling there. Along comes people talking about woke, talking about, transgenders, all of that. That's to hit at your feelings and your emotions. Who's winning the game? I mean, I'm just saying, I think we need to be very aware and cognizant of it. I don't know if that answers the question, Penny, but that's the best I can do.
Maxine, what do you have?
Well, it was in response to about 4 or 5 people back there. But one I wanted just to say to Sal, seems to me when you say after World War II, America was more unified. We loved the country more. But also, wasn't it because there was less inequality, there is more equality, it was more homogenized, and that made it easier to do that. It would be interesting to.
Sure. No, absolutely. And And that was what angered the slave masters.
Yes.
And they knew that to fight against it, they had to go underground, and that's what they did. So to change that dynamic required a very sophisticated action.
I wonder if I can talk to Terry about, or bring Terry in. It seems to me, I'm a therapist. It seems to me, so I always go to these big dynamics, that it's human nature. It's almost like we're in a Faustian argument or agreement. And that's part of human nature. And if we look, I'm reading Soul of America by John Meacham, and he's trying very hard to give us hope, watching how the United States has survived through incredible crises before. And when you read about it, you say, oh, this isn't as bad as I thought. It was worse back then. So I'm thinking in terms of human nature, we tend to forget and repeat rather than remember. I mean, look at, was it the Obama administration that hired the very people who had been part of the 2008 crash? Duh. I mean, what are we talking about here? And Obama is a smart, smart man. So I think that the change that happens, is in the law and also in culture. And I do believe we are moving upward. I mean, 10 years ago, who would have thought, 20 years ago, mixed marriages? Never. So things do change, but it seems to me that our human nature, because of the way we are easily seduced by our fears, our emotions, leaves us in this predicament forever, throughout history. And slowly we do move. I mean, we do have laws that make things better, but sometimes the laws like Roe versus Wade are taken down. But it is a slow movement up. I wondered if you would want to just respond to my pessimism or realism.
Well, you know who would respond very positively to it would be Freud himself, because Freud believed we were basically bad, that we were creatures of our unconscious and all kinds of things. And it took a while for somebody like Carl Rogers to come around and be more humanistic and say, no, 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 we're basically good. So that's like an age-old question. Are we basically good? Are we basically bad?
Oh, I gave the wrong impression. Whoa, 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 whoa. I am Freudian and Jungian and all that. I am more creation oriented than sin oriented.
Okay.
But I am realistic and understanding that human beings can easily be swayed. But I would look for positivity and creativity first. I do not believe we're sin-based.
Oh, no, I don't.
Or bad.
No, it wasn't a sin-based kind of thing. It was Freud was talking about the essence of human nature, not sin-based at all. He was
okay, and I don't believe that.
Yeah.
I don't believe, even though I'm trained Freudian, I don't believe that people are. I believe that we are born, minus trauma in utero, that we are born with positivity and creativity. So
I hope so. I hope so. I agree with you. I believe with you. And it's beliefs. It's beliefs. And it's what we learn. It's what we tell each other. And hopefully, what was that saying from Martin King Jr., Dr. King, the arc of justice. And I believe that. And I think the arc of humanity, I hope and pray, is as you present it to be. Yeah.
Well, let me throw cold water on all of it. Enough of this optimism stuff.
Hey.
I won't tolerate optimism in one of my jobs.
That's right.
Well, let me say this. It is important to understand that there is a small segment of the population, 1%, maybe less, that has a lot of power and doesn't think that they want to be good people. Remember, these are people who could enslave thousands of people for their own wealth and luxury. And they have a lot of money and they have a lot of power. And they know that most people would rather be creative and friendly and kind and good and wouldn't support their agenda. So what they're going to do is be able to, they're not going to come and say directly, come and support my evilness. They're going to disguise their evilness as something good to recruit all those nice people to come and help them. And that's what they've done. It is the Trojan horse. And it's important to see it. If you don't see it, and we don't do anything about it, mind you, they were minutes away from overthrowing the country. If Donald Trump had any skill in organizing anything, right? And he doesn't, but if he did, and mind you, the people who are looking to replace him do have those skills. He could easily have thrown out the Constitution. All he needs is the military and the police on his side. And if he had the right people in position, he would have been able to do it. And people would say, well, no, the court would that. The court has no police. The court has no power. Once you say, I'm declaring martial law, I'm suspending the Constitution. If I have the police and the military on my side, who's going to tell me no? Nobody. So we were inches away. You know, when they were running down the hallways there in Congress, had they had weapons, you could have shot Mitt Romney. You could have shot Nancy Pelosi. They were within inches of that happening. So the threat, I feel, is existential right now, and we need to be cognizant of it. It can quickly explode.
Does anyone else have anything else?
After that?
My only comment would be that after World War II, that our country seemed united as long as you weren't Black. I think the Blacks didn't feel so united with the rest of the country.
I like Ike. I like Ike.
So,
Well, but remember the Black soldiers and really the Black population historically has been patriotic. And so, yes, they come home with a sense of, we have made sacrifice, America is going to treat us differently now. And in fact, after World War II, that's when it starts to change because of that. But really, we find, you know, throughout, it is remarkable. The people most left behind by the system have been the most supportive of it.
Okay, how about Ralph? We'll give you one last shot at this, and then we're
Appreciate
gonna
that.
wrap it up.
I just wanted to make one brief comment, which was this period that we've been talking about after the Second World War. Yes, agree on all counts. In books I've read about that period, though, coming all the way through the 1960s, the authors were careful to say it's not that those were golden ages. They weren't. We all know that Black people were sent to the back of the bus until someone stood up and did something about it, and the civil rights movement came along. What I've heard said about those periods is that long period was that the stage was set for some real progress. Not that it was a golden age, but you had the basis of the beginnings of continued prosperity, continued equality. Not perfect, but we were headed in the right direction. So I think of those years as good years. Certainly they were good years for my parents and my family, but the stage was set for something better for the United States. And as Sal has been saying, it didn't happen. It went wrong. We went other directions, and he's been telling us the story of how.
Yeah,
And there we leave it.
It was like a Pax Romana, isn't that what they used to call it? I mean,
Yes,
things
right.
were.
Maxine, do you have something really quick?
Yeah, I'm
This man.
Maxine's husband, Cedric, and I was curious, Sol, your remark about the military and the police. How do we ensure that General Miley and people like that stay on the right side? And how do we keep them honest? Because that really is our ultimate protection, that they have a stake in a democratic system. And the moment they don't, we're lost.
Yeah, no, in my career, I would teach police different aspects. I was very much involved with law enforcement in one form or another, and it really hinges on the management of the police department. And there are ways in which we can run professional police department. And I felt we were making some gains in that. But I also candidly, I feel that there are very large cities where the management of the police is dysfunctional.
Yeah, but
when you look at the incident where the kid was dragged out of the car and beaten to death a few feet from his home, and mind you, they have a new police chief there now who's trying to fix things, but the previous administration, that's what they created. The line police officers reflect what the management has created.
But that's on a local level, Sal. What about the generals and the
No, right. Look, you had General Flynn, who was, a top intelligence officer, right? The military would do a very good job in screening those people out over time. I don't know how they slipped through the crack. My guess with that is that the war in Afghanistan went so badly that what you got was Flynn said, look, it's all corrupt. We're fighting the wrong war. I'm going to take a piece of the action myself. And so he flips over to the other side. But it's very difficult. It's very difficult.
And that uplifting note from Sal that we're so used to. I'd ask everyone to unmute and give
thanks, Sal.
Sal a big round of applause.
Thank you, Terry.
For this
Thank you, Terry and Sal.
Thank you.
Thank you, Terry.
Really
Thank
been amazing.
Good stuff.
What I'm going to do for the Vietnam class is the text, the write-up text, I'm going to send to everybody who's in this class, whether you're taking the class or not. I'm just going to send it out on an email in case you want to read it, because the class starts up in about 2 weeks.
Wow.
And there's a lot, I know how much you enjoy reading my papers. You have said that reading my stuff has allowed you to get off of sleeping pills. You fall asleep before you. But seriously, there's a lot to look at the Vietnam War. That a lot of new research, a lot of stuff that has been released recently. I've referenced a book that I think it's a short read by a professor who won Pulitzer Prize for his work on the Vietnam War. There's a whole bunch about what went on in the decision making, and it's not going to be about battles. The class ain't. There's some battle stuff, but it's not about fighting. It's about the politics. How did we get there? Who made what decisions? And And how did that all fall apart? And
Why did you pick the Vietnam War?
well, because you know,
It's the war of our ages.
but I'm going to do Iraq, Afghanistan, and Iran beginning next year. I think it's beginning. We're doing that, maybe fall. But
I better go.
you know, there's just actually, I would say this is a line from a Vietnam vet. He said, "We may be the last generation of soldiers who believe that our country would never lie to us."
Yeah.
Oh,
So we talk about, when I hope you, someone's picking up or giving me some point that I will disparage Democrats and Republicans equally. I mean, people tell me, "Oh, you're just a Democrat." Well, did you hear what I had to say about Obama? Anyway, we look at Trump as being the liar in chief, and he is. But Lyndon Johnson, and we're going to see the evidence of him lying about Vietnam.
The only thing I know is I had many, many students who fought in the Vietnam War. All of them, 100% of them were in recovery.
in recovery.
In recovery, 100%.
Not like World War II.
Yeah. Well, World War II, we didn't recognize post-traumatic stress disorder. And so what you had is World War II veterans self-medicating. So our alcoholism went through the ceiling.
Well, it was also run by McNamara and his mechanistic view, how much the body count and who's losing. And he's admitted afterwards he was totally wrong and he made a huge mistake. And he was actually full of contrition.
Well, coming home to,
Dean Rusk wasn't. Dean Rusk never apologized for Vietnam. He thought he was right.
or coming home to a country that considered you a fool for going there in the first place.
Donald Trump says I'm a sucker and a loser. And I'm proud of that. I want to get a t-shirt, sucker, loser. That's what Trump said about people who went to Vietnam. Bunch of suckers.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Why didn't you go to Canada? That was the plan.
we'll get into that. And but here's the thing. McNamara and all the others were fighting World War II.
Yes.
And they wanted the Vietnamese to fight World War II. But the Vietnamese were fighting a guerrilla war.
Yeah.
So we would go out and train the South Vietnamese as to how to fight World War II. And then we couldn't understand why they kept losing.
It's almost impossible to win a guerrilla war, I think, against the people who are in the country.
Yeah.
No, who are coming in.
There are techniques, though, for fighting a guerrilla war, which we didn't use.
Yeah.
And so they could not figure that out. And the South Vietnamese kept saying, "Why are you training us to do this when this is Vietnam?"
Or I know when I was at West Point, they said, this was Iraq, Iran, all the charts that were on the walls of the classrooms, the techniques of war or however they called it, they said they're all going to have to come down because there's no war like that anymore.
Right.
It was a learning curve.
Your appetite has been whet for the next series of classes. We're going to say thank you and ciao. See you next time.
Have something
Thanks, Sal.
Okay.